All right, welcome back. So this is going to be our sixth and final part for our histology lecture, and this is going to be a very short part because all we're covering is nervous tissue. So nervous tissue is the last of our tissue types. So we've covered epithelial tissues, we've covered connective tissue, we just covered muscle tissue in the previous lecture, and now we'll look briefly at nervous tissue. So nervous tissue is part of the nervous system. It's what makes up the nervous system. And being consistent with our definition of tissue being made up of more than two types of cells, or at least two types of cells, we have two types here. We have neurons, and we have what are called neuroglia cells, sometimes just referred to as glial cells. Right. So to start off first, if we look at the neurons, neurons are our actual electrical cells that are initiating electrical impulses and send these electrical impulses down the length of their cell to some type of effector, so a muscle or a gland, or they can receive it and send it to another neuron or some other type of cell. Okay, so we have different types of neurons. We have motor neurons and we have sensory neurons, and we'll talk more about that when we get into more specific nervous system lectures. But they form what are called synapses with each other. And synapses are just these connections between adjacent neurons. So there is a synapse at the end of one neuron and the beginning of another one. That's an easy way to think about it. All right. So neurons are the cells that send and receive electrical impulses. The other type of cell are the neuroglial cells. Right. So neuroglial cells are uh, what you can think of as supporting cells, right? So these are going to provide structural support, protection, nourishment to the various neurons and the tissue of the brain and the spinal cord and the rest of the nervous system. So different examples of these are microglia cells, astrocytes, Schwann cells, and oligodendrocytes. Two really important ones. They're all important, but two that we'll talk about in detail in later lectures are Schwann cells and oligodendrocytes. These help form something called the myelin sheath. And for now, you can just know that the myelin sheath is a wrapping, this kind of insulative wrapping around the axon of a neuron that helps to speed up the conduction of the electrical impulse or speed up the conduction of the action potential. All right. And so we'll talk about specific types of neuroglial cells in later lectures. There are different types of neurons. So we said there's motor and sensory, but there's also different ones based on their shape. So there's multipolar neurons and bipolar neurons and unipolar neurons. And we'll go into more detail on those later. But in general, you can see in these images down below that these large purple cells that you see here, these are the neurons. So the middle region, this large purple region, that is the soma or the cell body. In that you would have the nucleus. You have generally one long extension coming off one side of the cell, and this is called the axon. Okay, so if you look at the smaller image above, you see the cell body here with the nucleus in the middle, and then you see this long, slender axon coming down. Okay, the axon is what the action potential or the electrical impulse travels down after it leaves the neuron itself. Okay, the way the neuron receives the electrical impulses are through these small extensions called dendrites, and so the dendrites receive some type of impulse from a previous neuron. Okay, all right. So if we look at an example here, the example is going to be very easy because we just see nervous tissue, right? So it's generally pretty identifiable. So these large kind of purple-brown cells, these are the neurons, and then all these small dots that you see around, these are all of the glial cells or the neuroglial cells, all right? Now, you can't tell based on a light microscope image like this what specific type of glial cell it is. So just know that the large cells with these large projections, the dendrites and the axons, these are the neurons, and then all these smaller ones are the glial cells. You should note also that the neurons are not as great in number as the neuroglial cells. So in other words, there's far more glial or neuroglial cells than neurons. Okay, the neurons are larger, but the glial cells are more numerous. Okay, all right. You find this in the brain, you find this in the spinal cord, nerves, and so on. Okay, all right. So this covers our nervous tissue, and this ends our histology lecture. So if you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out, email me, get in touch with me, and I will be happy to answer your questions. All right, I will see you in the next video.